Cassie Ventura didn't just walk into Manhattan federal court. She strode in 9 months pregnant, belly first, eyes fixed straight ahead, while her ex-partner Sean Diddy Combs sat yards away facing a possible life sentence. The silent weight of that image, new life confronting decades of alleged abuse, hit the jury harder than any opening argument could. On paper, the case is about racketeering, targeting, and coercion, but inside the courthouse, it's really a battle over control. One woman reclaiming it while a music titan watches his crumble. Prosecutors say Combs ran the scheme like a dark empire. His lawyers insist every encounter was consensual. The difference could put him behind bars for 30 years, or leave Cassie alone with her story. And then, almost stealing the spotlight, came Cassie's husband, Alex Fine. Days earlier, he broke years of public silence, labeling Diddy a demon and promising to stand 10 toes down beside his wife. Reporters inside the gallery swear Fine never blinked as he locked eyes with Combs. The tension was thick enough to cut. What follows isn't a tabloid recap. It's the untold story of freak-offs, a firebombed Porsche, and 1,000 bottles of baby oil. Evidence federal agents say proves a pattern of domination stretching back 15 years. But the biggest shock may be what happens when Cassie finishes talking, because if her voice cracks Diddy's decades-long wall of silence, the rest of the industry might finally start to talk too. Stay with me, because the next revelation lands harder than the last. Cassie stepped through the double doors 8 months pregnant, a pale maternity dress skimming her ankles as cameras flashed behind the security rope. Jurors leaned forward, some visibly startled, because nothing in the indictment had prepared them for a witness who carried new life, while revisiting 13 years of alleged torment. Diddy's lawyers had begged the judge to seat her before the jury filed in, arguing that a pregnant belly would invite sympathy. The judge shot that down on the spot, and the plan backfired spectacularly. Cassie remained standing as 12 strangers took their places, giving them an unfiltered first impression of both courage and vulnerability. Once the clerk called the case, prosecutors rattled off the charges: sex-trafficking, racketeering, conspiracy, transportation for illicit acts. Crimes that could lock Diddy away for 15 years to life. The music mogul kept his eyes on the table, fingers tapping to a rhythm only he could hear. But courtroom sketches later showed a clenched jaw and a single bead of sweat tracking down his cheek. There are no cameras in federal court, only graphite sketches and whispered descriptions. Yet the tension felt almost cinematic. Reporters said the air thickened when Cassie finally lowered herself onto the witness chair. No introductory questions, no pleasantries, just a microphone, a glass of water, and 15 years of secrets waiting to be spoken aloud. And she hadn't uttered a word yet. The moment the oath left her lips, you could sense the gallery tighten because everyone knew the next sentences would peel the lid off something darker than tabloid headlines. But no one expected her first topic to be the freak-offs. Ritual nights drenched in baby oil and fear, and that's where we go next. Cassie's first words sliced through the hush. He called them freak-offs. Hotels booked under the aliases Jackie Starr for her and Frank Black or Frank White for him. Names chosen to hide the trail as Craigslist ads pulled in strangers who thought they were joining a fantasy, not a power ritual. Inside those rooms, the mood looked more music video than motel. Colored LEDs, phones locked away, and, according to Homeland Security photos, row after row of baby oil bottles, lubricant, and disposable cameras. Agents later counted dozens. Some outlets say more than 1,000 were seized in a single raid, a detail the prosecution hammered to show planning, not spontaneity. What sounded outrageous on paper landed colder when Cassie explained the why. Every 5 minutes, Diddy would halt the action, ordering a recoat if her skin wasn't glossy enough, an ex-assistant confirmed, describing how he'd line up 40-plus lotions like stage props before each session. The shine wasn't aesthetic, it was control. Slippery skin made resistance harder, cameras harder to grip, and humiliation easier to replay later. Then came the blackmail. Cassie told jurors Diddy once wordlessly held up an explicit video mid-flight, scrolling frame by frame so she'd absorb the message. Try to leave and this hits the internet. The threat worked. For years, she showed up on command, sometimes after seeing other men, sometimes shaken from earlier beatings because saying no felt more dangerous than compliance. Prosecutors stitched the story to the physical evidence: baby oil in hotel bathtubs, a Louis Vuitton bag of MDMA labeled Frank Black, and text messages where Cassie begged, "I'm not a ragdoll doll, I'm someone's child." Defense lawyers called everything consensual roleplay, but the jury, faces blank, pens frozen, looked unconvinced. And the violence hadn't even played yet, because the prosecution saved its bluntest weapon: a hallway tape, a firebombed Porsche, and a witness named Kid Cudi. Nothing in Cassie's description of freak-offs could prepare the jury for what they saw next. Prosecutors dimmed the lights and rolled hotel surveillance from 2016. Diddy sprinting down a Los Angeles hallway, seizing Cassie by the neck and hurling her to the floor before kicking her beside the elevator. Gasps rippled through the gallery. One juror covered her mouth, another scribbled "violent" in the margin of his notebook. Even Combs, stone-faced for 2 full days, blinked hard when his own image filled the screen. While the room was still processing the footage, prosecutors called former assistant George Kaplan. He recounted a 2015 flight on Combs' Gulfstream, where glass shattered. Cassie screamed, "Isn't anybody seeing this?" And no one moved until the plane landed. Kaplan quit weeks later, guilt-ridden that he'd once been ordered to find something strong enough to hide her bruises. The jury listened in stunned silence. Kaplan's voice cracked only when he admitted he still hears Cassie's plea at night. Then the prosecution shifted to Kid Cudi, and the courtroom's energy snapped from horror to disbelief. On the stand, Cudi testified that after word of his brief fling with Cassie reached Diddy, the mogul vowed, "I'll blow up that little car." Months later, a Molotov cocktail torched Cudi's Porsche in his driveway. Photographs of the charred frame flashed on the monitors, blackened metal curling like burnt paper. Cudi said he never filed charges because you don't cross a man with that kind of reach. By the time the government rested for the day, the jury had seen a hallway assault, a firebombed sports car, and a mid-air beating no one stopped. Diddy's attorneys called it rough love. The faces in the box told another story. Folded arms, tightened jaws, eyes locked on the defendant instead of the witness. And that's when a quiet figure in the second row, Alex Fine, finally stood, met Diddy's gaze, and refused to look away. The next morning, the headlines would christen him Cassie's Shield, and his presence would change the temperature of the entire trial. The next morning, courtroom regulars spotted a broad-shouldered man in a navy suit settling into the second row. Alex Fine, Cassie's husband, the same man who'd just called Sean Diddy Combs a demon in a blistering Instagram post. Cameras weren't allowed inside, yet word spread fast. Every time Combs glanced back, Fine met the stare and never blinked. Reporters said the tension felt like barbed wire strung between the pews. Fine's presence isn't mere symbolism. Raised by a single mother who survived domestic abuse, the former bull rider turned celebrity trainer has spent years backing violence awareness causes. In 2019, he ran 50 miles straight, no corporate sponsors, no entourage, to raise cash for a DV shelter. Cassie hugged him at the finish line, tears and sweat mingling on both their faces. That backstory makes his new role unmistakable. Protector, not spectator. When Cassie launched into the most graphic stretch of testimony, events from 2018 after she'd already met Fine, the judge briefly asked him to step outside so he wouldn't taint potential witness status. He complied, returned 20 minutes later, and resumed that silent stare down, jaw set, hands folded, a living reminder that Cassie is no longer alone. The public noticed. One viral thread praised Fine for standing 10 toes down in a room thick with trauma. Another dubbed him the blueprint for allyship. Even hardened trial reporters admitted his composure rattled Combs more than any cross-examination so far. But Fine's steady presence had an unexpected side effect. Diddy's own family began to crack under the spotlight. His daughters would walk out in tears, his mother's smile would wilt, and the defense's tone would shift from defiant to frantic. Diddy's supporters filed in dressed like a red carpet entourage, but the facade cracked fast. The moment male escort Daniel Phillip began spelling out the freak-off positions he says Combs choreographed, Chance, Delilah, and Jessie, Diddy's 3 teen daughters, grabbed their jackets, whispered to security, and slipped out of the room, faces pale. Reporters on the hall heard one of them choke back a sob before the doors swung shut. Back inside, Janice Combs tried to steady the ship, smiling, waving, even blowing a kiss when court recessed. But the mask wobbled. A Yahoo reporter said her eyes glossed over when the hallway assault tape replayed and never quite cleared. The tension spiked when defense counsel suggested Cassie might have enjoyed the encounters. Jurors folded arms, rolled eyes. One shook her head so sharply the marshal glanced over. Prosecutors pounced, calling the same escort back to confirm he'd assumed Cassie's consent. That single misstep turned a risky cross-examination into a glaring own goal. Back inside, Janice Combs tried to steady the ship, smiling, waving, even blowing a kiss when court recessed. But the mask wobbled. A Yahoo reporter said her eyes glossed over when the hallway assault tape replayed and never quite cleared. The tension spiked when defense counsel suggested Cassie might have enjoyed the encounters. Jurors folded arms, rolled eyes. One shook her head so sharply the marshal glanced over. Prosecutors pounced, calling the same escort back to confirm he'd assumed Cassie's consent. That single misstep turned a risky cross-examination into a glaring own goal. By lunch break, the optics were brutal. Combs' family retreating, his legal team backpedaling, and Alex Fine planted in the pews like an immovable pillar. The contrast, defendant's circle unraveling while Cassie's support stiffened, thickened the sense that momentum had shifted. But the biggest silence sat outside the courtroom, where hip-hop's royalty still hadn't uttered a word. That hush, louder than any testimony, sets the stage for a reckoning the industry can no longer dodge. Outside the courthouse, a second trial is unfolding, and this one has no judge. It's playing out on timelines, podcasts, and boardrooms across the music business as fans wait to see whether hip-hop finally faces its long-delayed reckoning. Industry insiders have whispered about Combs' parties for years, yet when Cassie's testimony began, the loudest names, Jay-Z, Mary J. Blige, French Montana, stayed radio silent. Commentators dubbed the hush ear-splitting, comparing it to Hollywood's first reaction when the Harvey Weinstein dam burst. But the wall of quiet is cracking. Day 26's Willie Taylor posted a cryptic "NDAs won't save you forever" tweet. Danity Kane's Aubrey O'Day resurfaced old studio horror stories in an Instagram Live, and choreographer Lorianne Gibson hinted she'd said too much for lawyers to ignore. Entertainment attorneys say they've already fielded calls from former dancers, assistants, and junior A&R reps who signed Combs-backed non-disclosure deals in the 2000s. One lawyer told the Washington Post her office is triaging potential civil claims in anticipation of a verdict. At the same time, #HipHopMeToo, a hashtag that flickered in 2018 but never caught, has roared back to life. Think pieces on NPR and ABC call Cassie the catalyst the culture sidestepped for a decade. Even talk radio hosts who once dismissed label gossip as messy ex-drama now wonder aloud whether rap is facing its own Penn State moment, a house of cards where everyone knew a little but no one spoke. Within labels, the anxiety is palpable. Capitol execs reportedly froze a marketing deal with Combs' tequila line. Atlantic and Sony scheduled emergency compliance meetings. Spotify analysts flagged a 12% dip in Combs-linked streams the week Kid Cudi testified that his Porsche was bombed after he dated Cassie. Meanwhile, grassroots calls for accountability surge. Survivor advocates are circulating open letters urging artists to cut ties and cut checks, demanding labels push funds into abuse prevention programs. The American Foundation for Domestic Violence told AP inquiries spiked 40% in the trial's first week. If the jury believes Cassie, expect a flood, not a trickle of new testimonies. Prosecutors have already teased unindicted co-conspirators, hinting that what's on the charging sheet may be just the prologue. As one columnist wrote, Diddy might be the headline, but the footnotes are full of familiar names. And the silence? It's beginning to sound less like loyalty and more like fear of what happens when the mic finally shifts their way. When court adjourns each day, Cassie doesn't retreat to a hotel. She heads home to a quiet cul-de-sac where two little girls, Frankie, 4, and Sunny, 3, race to the door and wrap themselves around her pregnant belly, while a crib for a baby boy waits half-finished in the nursery. It's a world built brick by brick to be the opposite of the one she's testifying about. Light where there was darkness, laughter where there was silence. That piece didn't come cheap. In January 2023, Cassie checked herself into Willow House, a 45-day inpatient program in Arizona, and spent weeks hooked to neurofeedback monitors, cycling through EMDR sessions that dragged buried memories into daylight. She told the jury the goal wasn't to cure love addiction, as Diddy's lawyers implied, but to rewire a brain stuck in survival mode. One therapist called it the emotional equivalent of breaking and resetting a shattered bone. Healing also meant facing the ugliness on paper. Prosecutors displayed the 2016 text where she pleaded, "I'm not a rag doll, I'm someone's child," after Diddy beat her outside a Los Angeles hotel. Reading it aloud, Cassie paused, inhaled, then said, "That's the moment I realized I could still speak for myself." Enter Alex Fine, the man who once ran 50 unbroken miles to raise money for domestic violence shelters because his own mother survived abuse. The finish line hug he shared with Cassie in 2019 has gone viral again this week, a living gif of what support looks like when the cameras aren't rolling. In court, he's taken on a different marathon, 8 hours a day of silent vigilance, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on the defendant. And while the couple fight for emotional restitution, the financial stakes loom just as large. Federal RICO statutes allow prosecutors to seize everything tied to the alleged sex-trafficking enterprise, Combs' $40 million Los Angeles mansion, Miami real estate, even his share of bad boy records. If the jury convicts, experts say forfeitures and civil damages could reach 9 figures, money that would flow first to victims' restitution before the government takes a cut. In plain English, Cassie could win back years of stolen autonomy and secure her children's future in one verdict. Yet ask her what victory looks like, and the answer lands closer to home. It's waking up without checking the locks twice, she told a therapist at Willow House, according to court exhibits. Freedom isn't measured in dollars. It's the absence of fear. Next comes the hardest weight, deliberation. If 12 strangers believe her, Cassie's fight becomes precedent. If they don't, it becomes warning flare for the next survivor. Either way, the ground under hip-hop is already shifting, and the conclusion of this trial will decide whether the crack widens into an earthquake or snaps shut in silence. That final aftershock is where we'll end our story. Cassie Ventura walked into a courtroom and cracked open a story powerful enough to rattle an entire genre. Her testimony rewound years of silence, freak-offs, hallway beatdowns, a torched Porsche, and played them back in high definition for a jury that now holds Diddy's future, and maybe hip-hop's conscience in its hands. Beside her, Alex Fine rewrote the role of celebrity spouse, standing guard without a single headline-chasing soundbite, proving that unwavering presence can be louder than any press tour. Yet the real aftershock may come after the verdict. If 12 strangers decide Cassie's nightmare was real, those NDA walls protecting studios, award shows, and fortunes could tumble overnight. A guilty ruling would liquidate assets, embolden quiet survivors, and force record labels to choose between empire and ethics. An acquittal wouldn't erase the testimony, it would simply dare the industry to keep pretending it never heard the screams. Either way, the music world has already crossed a line it can't moonwalk back over. Cassie's story turned a private trauma into a public mirror, reflecting questions every fan now has to answer. Is the beat still worth dancing to when you know the cost? Whether the floodgates swing wide or stay wedged shut, one thing is certain: silence is no longer the safe track. And in that thundering quiet, a single voice has begun to sound a lot like the first note of a brand new chorus.